Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Working Remotely. My name is Sandy Lowe, and today we are working remotely with Jon Reed, co founder of Diginomica and a longtime enterprise software influencer. Hey, John, how are you?
I'm doing good in the bunker here in Massachusetts.
Yeah,
Hanging tough.
how long has it been
Yep.
for you?
Ever since I got back from our last Diginomica UK sessions, which is about I don't know, like 5 weeks or so, pretty
Oh,
much
wow. Okay.
bunkered in.
Oh, wow. So speaking of Diginomica, actually, if I'm correct, you guys are a pretty dispersed team from the
Yep.
start. Yeah? And how has that worked for you? How did you guys find each other? How did you guys launch the
Mm,
site remotely? And how do you guys keep it operational and productive with these varying
mm,
personalities you guys have virtually?
mm. Yeah, I mean, we kind of had a head start on the remote thing, obviously. And I had actually been working remote since the year 2000, and there when I started my first enterprise related company. And for the most part, in our line of work, media analysts, however you classify us, we're traveling all the time to shows, and that's how we
Mm-hmm.
get to know each other. When we're not at shows, we are generally working from home, and so we're trying to figure out like how to be as productive as we can on the home front. And for me, up until recently, it was more like my home front was more like a staging area for in between trips. I got suitcases piled high and all my gear, and I got to sort and and then back on the plane. But over time, got a much better feeling for how to work remotely as a team. And with Diginomica, we had five co-founders, and still have five at the core, and then we have about 20 contributors that we need to connect with in various ways.
Wow.
Um, and so one of the really big challenges in all of that is to figure out, like you said, like how do you handle all the different aspects of working together as a team remotely? And that's a combination of tools and processes and culture really. And you think about it because you're like, well, yeah, some things are easy to do remotely, comparatively speaking, like sharing images for articles or things like that. But then what happens if people have a strong disagreement on
Mm-hmm.
a business strategy or approach? Or what happens if there's an issue with the client that needs to be put out in the next 24 hours? What do you do if the website goes down? Like, so you're trying to think about like how do you anticipate and work through all of these things? And one thing we know about working remotely is that it's a little bit harder to deal with the tougher stuff, right? Like, so if you're having an issue with a colleague, a lot of times that would have been easier to sit down face to face and work through that. So how do you work through that remotely? And so you have to kind of figure all that out. I wouldn't say we figured everything out, but we probably have a few tips that are worth sharing.
That's interesting. So you just brought up conflict management. That hasn't come up yet in any of my conversations. So I'm going to force you to talk a little bit more about that. You don't have to use real life
Mm,
examples happening with your team, but how in a few words, I guess what has worked remotely in terms of resolving team
mm.
conflicts.
Well, I think one thing is to really understand some of the limitations of each tool you're using and how best you work through things as a team. One thing I try to warn people about with remote work is that you do have to err on the side of over communication with your team
Mm-hmm.
members until you achieve the right level of communication.
Mm.
So at certain points, it may feel like you're oversharing, but it's really important to remember that people lack the context to understand what you're thinking about in ways that they would if they were hanging out with you, because after work you go to dinner or whatever and you get a drink or coffee, or so people lack that context. And the other thing to remember in general, as a general rule, is that people trend colder in their written correspondence. So like for example, most people, their email and online interactions, they're not as warm and personable as they are like in person. Now this is a general thing that I've found across, and so it requires some intentionality to think about, like, first of all, how do I warm up my correspondence a little bit so that people
Mm-hmm.
don't misinterpret my tone or feel like I'm being overly critical? Because that, after a while, that can really start to grate on you. And secondly, how do you give your coworkers the benefit of the doubt instead of assuming, oh my God, they just really went off on me in that email, you know,
Mm.
like, and like I got an email today where someone was like, um, I was telling them about a change in invoicing payments because of coronavirus has changed our financial stuff. And the email back was, this is a real problem for me. But I realized he meant to say, this is not a problem for me. And so you have to step back from a little bit of that stuff and realize like there's always a context that you don't want to assume too much. But then it's a matter of figuring out like what channels work the best for certain things. And in general, like getting, if it's a really intense issue, like you're going to need to pull out all the stops and get on a video call and really hash things out. Video is still not as good as sitting face to face for the more sensitive issues, but it's the next best thing. So there's an art to knowing what you can process in what form. And especially with certain things where you see certain email threads where you're like, wow, we need to stop this interaction right now and get on the phone. And it might be because it's a conflict, or it might just be because it's just a waste of time, or there's a misunderstanding, or there's logistical issues involved. It takes time and practice to figure out what the right tool and format is for the different things you're trying to work through.
Yeah, thank you for getting into that. That's actually really good advice because I think up to now, a lot of these sessions we focus on, technology aspect of things, but there is a real human element here where, how someone interprets something, how it comes out, it could become a big issue when you're working in a virtual environment. So, speaking of, working virtually, which most of us are now, I think that there is, that misconception out there that it is working remotely perhaps just means doing the same thing online. Obviously, based on what you said, it isn't quite the same. Now, when it comes to all the canceled events, a lot of meetings being canceled, it isn't just all about plopping everything physical online and it's resolved. I mean, what have you been seeing out there that's been working or not working? And what would you advise vendors, businesses, customers, anyone on how they need to manage the level of engagement now during this time?
So I've been writing for years to vendors about that their webinars are really horrible. And most haven't listened to me, but a couple have. And I actually made the business case for more interactive environments a long time ago. And one of the reasons for that is that people make decisions on software not based on information, but on who they trust. And that trust extends to all interactions with the company. If you get on an online thing and someone's just talking at you for an hour, like how is that developing a relationship that you can count on? It's not. So there's been a business case for more interactive online events for a long time, but vendors are scared of those. They're scared because they feel like they lose control of the messaging. They lose control of the format. For example, one of my big things is I advocate in online events to have a written chat where people can be chatty and ask questions. And I tell vendors to assign someone just for the chat. And it's not someone who's speaking, it's someone who's just going to interact on the chat. They're going to post helpful links. They're going to resolve issues. They're going to say, hey, can we contact you about this? But a lot of vendors get offended because they're like, well, they're chatting while my very important person is giving us a PowerPoint demonstration. And it's like, you know what? Like, that doesn't matter, because if they really need to hear what you're doing on the slides, they can watch the replay later. That's what replays are for. The live immediacy is what really counts. And vendors are very afraid of that historically. And what I really want to get across now is that not only is there a business argument for a more interactive online experience, but there's a human argument. Like, a lot of people are either on their own completely right now, or alternately, they're stressed out by living in close quarters with their family and like trying to figure out how to be on Wi-Fi at the same time and how to respect each other's space and all this other stuff. Either way, when they get onto this online experience, they're looking for a connection. They're looking, information is one thing, but more important is, can I reach out? Can I share how I'm doing today? Can I learn how other people are doing? And for the most part, I have to tell you, Sandy, just about every vendor I've seen is failing on this. And even the big ones that you would think, like a bunch of virtual events loaded up this week, like load up 100 canned recorded sessions, and that's it. You log on, you're looking for some live updates from the CEO. Nope, they taped it in advance. That doesn't make any sense. If your CEO doesn't have the guts to get on a live event and answer questions in real time, then you have a problem as a company, and you need to fix that. So that's one thing. It's just, there's ways you can really make these experiences better for people. And now, having said that, just to use a positive example, because a lot of people think the technology isn't there yet. And yes, there are. If you want to do a full-scale virtual event with like online networking rooms and things like that, it's a little more challenging. The tech is getting better, but even simple things like I know of a user group, for example, where what they did, instead of trying to figure out all the answers and tell people everything's okay, they gathered together a bunch of different online sessions by role. So CIOs could join one, marketers could join another, and just talk about what they're dealing with right now and just share information. I just thought that was fantastic. Like, facilitating those connections between people. Like, how powerful is that as a brand you can do that for your constituents? And so there's all kinds of creative ways you can do it. And you don't have to have all the answers. You just have to have some guts and some willingness to push back on marketers and say, like, this is a better way to go, but you have to let go of a little bit of control in order to gain the benefit of the community. But there will be a positive business benefit as well.
You're giving me a lot to think about. I mean, this is, it's been top of mind for some time. And, we also cancel our user con from Zoholics in Austin. And, we are not moving it to a virtual format because, we want to stay true to the Zoho vibes that people say that, our events do have. And, to date, we still don't know how to exactly replicate that online. I am thinking that, Raju, my guest now in particular, will be very interested in what you have to say here. Thank you for sharing those thoughts. So now let's move back for a second. You being in the software industry for decades, not too many, just a couple decades. And, same on my end. I mean, we know how to adapt to remote work technology, or it's pretty much second nature to some of us, right? So in terms of some of those businesses who are not, perhaps, do you have any words of wisdom for them on how to get started? And what are some, I guess, some tips that they should keep in mind as they're navigating this new world?
So there's a bunch of different things. And if you do, I don't want to plug our site too much, but we have covered this topic extensively. So if you do a search on remote work, you'll see a bunch of stuff. I wrote a piece called Remote Work at Enterprise Scale that I think is especially relevant here, which is to start understanding that there are issues of scale involved here. And some of this are just limitations of, like there was a piece this week about how Microsoft Azure is being a little bit stressed in certain regions by the amount of traffic. But when you think about enterprise scale, you think about things like data compliance, security, and just realizing that even if you're experienced with that stuff, there may be fresh challenges that have to be conquered. Because the one thing is, like, a lot of us were working remotely mostly on our mobile devices. The advantage with a mobile device is that, generally speaking, it's constantly updating all its applications, which helps protect against security issues. But when I'm working on my computer at home, I might be working on an old Windows machine that like 7, for example, that's no longer being updated, and I don't usually use that computer. Well, if that's out of date, that's a much more of a dangerous environment for me to also be commingling my work data. Those are the kinds of issues that the companies need to kind of collectively tackle. And then from a cultural perspective, they just need to start thinking about, I did a piece on a company, a Microsoft partner actually, AppPoint, that was actually rolling out in China in the midst of everything going down there, and the challenges they had there because China was in severe lockdown mode. I mean, like we might be stressing outside of China, but like imagine what it was like there with drones on the streets and military at every corner, and you're not going out of your living space. And that's a somewhat traumatic situation, and I think you have to think through as a company how you're going to support people on a human level. And so there's a lot of cultural issues that have to be tackled collectively as well. And then the final thing is, like, how do you assess productivity? And I think it's really, I've been an advocate for a very long time now that we should assess people based on their deliverables. I had an argument with a client many, many years ago because he was yelling at a salesperson because he was like, we got our conference call, I was like, you haven't been on the extranet all day, and he's looking for like, I want to see every call you've made and blah, blah, blah. And, you took a 2-hour lunch and da, 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 da. And I got the guy on the phone later and I said, you have a salesperson. He has a quota each month, a target that he's trying to reach. Mm-hmm. If he beats the crap out of that quota, why do you care if he's out for 2 hours?
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. and this is more the case now than ever, because like I might have a kid who's having a tantrum or a health flare up. I need to drop off for a couple hours. So what we need to do is to figure out things like, how are we really being judged at home? Mm-hmm. And I would really advocate, and I know this plays into Zoho's message in general, which is I would advocate not a surveillance culture around like, I mean, the extreme thing is like, oh, we're on video all the time together. No, like empower people to figure out how to check in regularly, but then also how to give them the freedom to figure out how they're going to make this work. And how are they going to be judged? What are the so-called deliverables they need to be producing? All of us have them of various kinds. And so the more we can empower people to say, look, we know it's stressful, but flex this around what you need to do. You need to be at these meetings each week. You need to get these deliverables done. The rest, you figure it out. Mm-hmm. That's the kind of work approach that I think is going to work better for people.
No, I can't agree more. As a working mom and advocate for working moms, I do think that, what you just said is what we absolutely need more of. And I hope that even after we beat the pandemic, that type of culture does carry over and we become flexible all around and really measure on results versus clocking in hours. So, thanks for sharing that.
Companies have really excluded a lot of talented people historically from the workforce for these reasons, right? I mean, your working moms examples is a great one. There's a lot of disabled people that have special needs that are incredibly capable workers, but they might not be able to adhere to the same exact schedule. And just in general, I think there's a recognition that those of us that have worked at this, that you can't really sit at your desk 9 to 5. Like you have to figure out a different rhythm if you're going to do this. And especially now, because this actually reminds me more of my very earliest days of working remotely in the early 2000s, where my office internet was so much better than anything I could get out that I was pretty much like kind of stuck in my office all day. And then eventually got much more flexible, where I'm like working in cafes and I'm grabbing my laptop and everything's fluid, and I'm going for a walk and I'm hanging out and I'm making phone calls in the park, and now it's like shut down, and I would just encourage people to realize that this is not how remote work should actually be. This is a very special circumstance that's don't judge remote work necessarily based on what's happening now, because remote work can actually be a lot more empowering than what we're experiencing now. What we're experiencing now is a very hardcore version of it that we have to figure out how to work with.
Yeah, it's almost like we need a new term for remote working under these, these constraints.
It's like quarantine work, right? It's different.
Yeah,
we're kind of under at least informal quarantine, and that's a different standard. And we're fortunate, obviously, to most of us to have decent internet. But aside from that, like we're scrambling a bit to keep morale up and figure out how to make this work.
Definitely. So now let's talk about you. Being the remote working professional that you are. So what are some must-dos or must-haves in Jon's world to stay productive and focused?
That's really interesting. I mean, I think I got to have my good coffee. I have a 20-year-old coffee maker, and I love it because it makes all these like spits and like really soothing homey sounds. And when I put that on every morning, it kind of gets me into a groove. The other thing is, and I'm drinking out of my Cosmo mug to remember some of the good times we've had at events in the past.
Yes.
These kinds of things are good for morale, like getting your workspace just right. I've got my decor, I've got my whiteboard, as you can see, and my lead. But then in general, it's like certain things that you put a little time into to make sure things are going to work for you. Like I have I don't want to say the name because I don't want to activate it right now, but I have my Echo devices. They provide me with certain things. I've taken the trouble to set up music playlists on those. And some of those I'll put on in the morning when I'm just getting into gear and just getting going. They kind of sort of get me kind of in a good chill mood and kind of in a rhythm of getting ready for the day. And then, I have my Spotify playlist that I'll use when I'm writing. And those things kind of help me flow when I need to kind of focus. So little things like that are really important. But in general, like one of my big things is come up for air frequently. So every 30 minutes or an hour, I'm coming up for air. And that might mean different things depending on which time. Like things I think about are things like stretching, for example, ergonomic things. Like I have like different back and neck things that I do, like to kind of stretch. Because right now, if you don't do those things and you start to develop chronic issues, have fun getting those treated. So we have to pay, I think, special attention right now to ergonomic health. I spent a lot of time thinking about nutrition because I think it's one thing to work from remote and just grab whatever's in the fridge for a couple of days. But after that, you need to start thinking about how am I getting proper vegetables, proper whatever. And throughout the day, how am I hydrating? Sounds cheesy, but like these things help you. They take you away from work for a sec, and then you're kind of reprioritizing too. So you're thinking about like, okay, I got distracted by this issue. I did some social media. I got into some conversations that was good. Now I got to step back and think about what else I got to get done today because today's finite. So there's frequent kind of reprioritization that's very, very helpful because one thing you kind of realize pretty early on is you're not getting everything done today. So you're going to have to regroup and kind of have your little war room moments of figuring out like what's left to do and what can I push off. And so, I'm kind of thinking about stuff like that. So I think that's the biggest thing that I would advise is just some people are really big on routines. I'm not a huge fan of routines. I was more when I started, but I like more natural things. I think kids need routines. So if you have kids at home, like getting them on a routine is vitally important. But as far as yourself, I think coming up for air and reprioritizing is more important than a routine because like what you think you need to do today might change dramatically in a matter of an hour or two based on what your colleagues need from you, based on a flyer that you might need to put out. So you need to have a really good skill of reallocating your remaining time.
Definitely. So before we let you go, what is one word you would use to describe your home office, Jon?
Bat cave.
Oh, wow. Okay.
It's my bat cave.
Nice. Very good.
It's a place for evil plans to come to fruition and a place for me to kind of find as much, sustenance as I possibly can, So I've always referred to it as the bat cave. And so that will continue.
All right. Well, you guys, you can see his Twitter handle back there. He is at Jon ERP. Jon, thanks for speaking with us today. And I am sure we'll be talking to you very soon. Thanks for all your advice.
My pleasure.
Thank you.